Welcome to Insights into Success. We're with your host Paul Dodds. We hope to educate, inspire and motivate you to achieve your own personal success. We talk to guests from all around the world from a variety of walks of life to hear the realities of their own journey to success. What challenges have they faced? How have they coped with failure? And what have been the keys or will be the keys to their own success? In our Read to Succeed interviews, we talk books that have inspired our guests, and for some, they share their secrets to marketing success. Join us as we give you insights into success. All right, well, welcome to Insights into Success. Our special guest today is Adam Adams. Thank you so much, Adam, for agreeing to be on board with us today. Really interested to hear your story. So maybe you could kick it off just by giving us a little bit of background as to who exactly you are and what you do. And then we're going to go back in time and learn a bit about your background and how it's made you the person that you are now.
Absolutely. Well, I appreciate you letting me be on your show. Had you on ours as well. And so it's just nice to collaborate. I currently right now, the main focus that I have in business is supporting podcasters. My team, we have 32 employees. And
Wow.
what we're doing now today is serving podcasters to help them offload all the hard stuff so they can still have a show and not with all of the work. Let them kind of stay in their lane. That's one of the main things we're doing. I've been doing real estate investing since 2005 because of my stepdad, who basically told me I had to real estate invest, and that was what I needed to do. So I've been doing that for quite some time, and technically I still do own a couple of apartment buildings and a few houses, although those are kind of set on autopilot, and I'm not looking to grow them today. But I basically do two things: real estate investing, and we have a company called Grow Your Show that helps podcasters. So those are the two things that we do right now, to answer your question.
All right. Okay. Now I want to go back in time because that's often really insightful for people to understand what makes people tick and how they've come to be the way they are. And also too, a lot of people, it's very easy to characterize and look at other people as successful and go, oh, well, that's because they came from money and, life's probably been really easy for them. So I'm really wanting to sort of explore that and see to what extent that is actually the case with my guests. So I'm wondering if you could take me back and tell us where actually were you born in America, and just give us a bit of a background, and let's gradually walk our way forward and understand a bit more about how you tick the way you tick.
Yeah. Well, you and I did speak for a few minutes before we started recording, and there's a few things that I believe would make sense to bring out right now. And so I'm going to go further back than maybe some of your guests. First and foremost, interestingly, when I was born in the middle of nowhere in a city that is undisclosed, but like out in the outskirts. We had a generator, and there was 7 little trailers. So my dad lived in a trailer, and then he had 6 wives at the time. This is like a little polygamous colony, an offshoot of Mormonism in the middle of Utah somewhere. And so my mom was actually the 6th of 6 wives. And so I've got like all of these brothers and sisters from everybody else, and definitely didn't start for money there. And my mom wanted to impress her family, which is kind of why she did that. Strangely enough, like her parents grew up more of the mainstream Latter-day Saint. Right. But when there was some things that changed that they believed would never change, they believed that we're never supposed to change within that Mormon doctrine. My grandpa left that and became more of a fundamentalist, and all of my aunts and uncles left the church. And so like my mom wanted to be daddy's little girl, wanted to impress my grandfather. And so she, even though she didn't like really want to do it, she really wanted to make dad proud. And so she married one of the apostles in that like subsect of the Mormon church that the Mormons probably are currently renouncing. You know, they're not even affiliated with it, but that's kind of where I grew up. And my mom was unable to take us with her. So she like left the church, and then like a year and a half later, I became such a bad kid. Like I was 3, almost 4, when they said, we cannot handle this kid, we're giving him back. But my mom was just going to school at the time. She wanted to become a computer programmer. She wanted to like make her life something. And so she was living on her own in an apartment and barely able to afford things. We lived with my grandma for just a short amount of time, and then we moved in with my mom after I turned 4, which is
sorry,
go ahead.
Just get a clarity there. So you were born into a polygamous family, and then did your mother then leave your father, but then you went to live with other people while she tried to get an education to better herself? Is that how it works?
Yeah, exactly. We lived with my grandmother just for a few months until a little after I was 4.
Okay.
Where I was going with it is that my mom eventually, she got a job, and she moved us in, but she couldn't afford a car yet, and so we lived with family for a short amount of time, and then we moved into our own place. And she just kind of slowly got I call it the American dream. She became a top 1% income earner, but slowly over time. So for the most part, we didn't have much. We didn't have a car until I was probably 8 years old. And she remarried my stepdad, who is and has been for a long time a business owner and a real estate investor. I will say, just because it's interesting, my name, Adam Adams, came right after I was 4, because we were about to go to school, and my mom wanted to not have to think about her ex. And so I got her maiden name. So that's why it's Adam Adams. But fast forward, like my stepdad really made a huge impact. He owned like a landscaping company, some self-storage units, a few rentals, and a tree farm. And when I was 5 years old, before they even got married, is when I started watering plants. And through the time that I was 8 or 9, I was just getting paid $1 an hour during the summers working with him. And that has a huge deal to like why I do a lot of the things that I've done since then.
Yeah. And so during those early years, really, for you, things were pretty tough. And I imagine maybe some of your behavior could have been because you're not thinking about it consciously, possibly, but maybe felt a bit neglected at the time because your mum was trying to get an education, and you had a lot of free time to yourself.
Yeah, 100% true. I don't know if I ever felt like that in the early years. I believe that I didn't ever really feel connected that well. And it's because my mom was single for a long time and working, and probably didn't have the time or the energy to deal with everything like homework. And so I slipped a lot on a lot of homework. I also have been diagnosed with like ADHD and dyslexia. So just some of that stuff is naturally more challenging for me individually. And so I let a lot of it go, got in a lot of fights when I was like young, even got kicked out of some schools for fighting and just acting up. Hey, we can't deal with him anymore. You gotta have him somewhere else. And so all of that, I'm sure, was a huge challenge for my mom. And me personally, I didn't really have, that adult figure that strong in my life, even after my mom remarried. My stepdad worked a lot as well. And I think internally, I think he had a challenge, maybe directly knowing how to deal with like a stepson and a stepdaughter he had as well. And so like he kind of was like, all right, to my mom, you should deal with him. Like I'm not sure how far to step or
Yeah.
what to do here. I think I felt that for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it must be hard for step parents because you're not their blood child, and you don't want to sort of cross the line, and you're not quite sure. Well, I'm assuming you're probably not quite sure to what extent you'll be accepted by the children.
Hmm.
So hard to know what the boundaries are, I would imagine, in that situation.
Yeah. I have a stepson now, and I've definitely felt all of those challenges, and I've seen it, and I'm actually quite impressed, even though I didn't maybe recognize it at the time. I'm impressed with how my stepdad loved me and
Yeah.
poured into me, because he really did do a good job, even if it were slow, and he didn't want to overstep for several of the first years.
And how was it for you as a young child having this new father? For you, were you quite accepting of it? I mean, were you, really excited to have this father figure in your life, or were you more standoffish and really took a while for things to really connect between the two of you?
It's almost hard to say out loud that I would be standoffish. It's almost difficult to even like admit that, because I didn't really recognize it at the time. But if I'm trying to be completely honest, I would have to say that it was slow moving and a challenge to um, really accept
Yeah,
him as like my father figure for many years. I think it took until I was probably in graduating high school until I recognized that he's been there for me, always been there for me, cares about me, wants the best for me. Um, but I do believe that for most of those years, I probably was slightly resentful to an extent,
right.
and had the feeling of you're not my dad, uh and felt like, hey, I was fine before you came along, why do I need you, in a
Right.
way, if I'm being honest.
Yeah. And did he have any children that he brought into the family?
No, my half brother uh was born when I was 9, and
Right.
so I and to be completely honest, I could tell a difference between me, the step kid, who
Yeah.
was a fighter and had an attitude problem,
Yeah.
and the challenges of loving me and accepting me completely, versus his own flesh and blood, who had not tainted that relationship yet.
Yeah.
So where I felt for some years after being 9 and growing up through high school, where I felt like maybe he doesn't think I'm his, but he knows that that's his.
Yeah.
Um, to be honest, like I feel like there had to have been an element of that I was recognizing in some of those years after my half brother was born.
And now that you have followed in his footsteps, does that make you look back differently and interpret it differently and see the challenges that he must have faced?
It really does. One benefit that I had is becoming the father figure of my stepson when he was just 2. And that is, I believe, a huge benefit, because
Yeah.
he couldn't remember another father figure. And
Yeah.
so, like, raising him and my other son around the same time, even though they were just like maybe 3 years apart,
Yeah.
that I've been basically both of their dads for this entire time, when it might have been a little bit longer for my stepdad, but and me. But I've seen some of those challenges, and I feel like I was a bad kid. I was like a troublemaker. And my stepson is like an angel. Like he
Oh,
listens, he's amazing. And we've still had challenges like in through through this time connecting. And so like it makes me I don't know if you've ever heard that song. It's like a country singing song where he didn't even have to be half the man, or I I I hope I can be half the man he didn't have to be, is how it
right,
goes.
right.
Um, every time I hear that song, like I start bawling because I really truly recognize how incredible, even though he might not have wanted to overstep, even though he was careful. And
Yeah,
especially because I was a challenging child, I think that it makes me choked up because I realize how much he really wanted to be there, cared. He never
yeah,
yelled. I sometimes have a temper. He never yelled at us. And I'm like, I feel like was such a incredible man that took on some responsibility that he didn't have to, you know?
right, right. Yeah, no, it's interesting, the fact that you've gone on and sort of replicated what he had to go through, and then that's given you so much more insight. So tell me though, what changed for you? What was it that changed you from being a problem child? Because clearly things changed at some point. So can you pinpoint when that happened, or was it a transitional thing?
Main thing that I would have to say changed because of the timing is when I started playing music.
Right.
Growing up, I never wanted to pay attention to anything for very long. And I never thought that I was smart enough to like learn an instrument. So I was trying to take in junior high school and middle school. My goal was to take either wood shop or metal shop because like I really wanted to be a manly man. And those were the things when I was that age that were exciting for me, is being able to work with my hands. So I signed up for one or the other. I think it was like, I'll do wood shop, but if you don't have any openings in the school, like let me take metal shop. And this was going to be 8th grade. I had already done my 7th grade of junior high, and I was going into 8th grade of junior high. 7th, 8th, and 9th is where it is in the school system that I was in. But
Yeah.
that was the thing where they didn't have any room in either one. And the strangest thing that just, it almost seems divine, because of how much I really believe that it did change me,
Yeah.
is that they put me in 7th grade, beginning percussion. And so, like, I
Right.
was in 8th grade, and when you're that age, 1 year, you think that these people are so babyish and you're such an adult just because you're 1 year different.
Yeah.
Obviously, we don't think that when we're adults, but when you're in
No.
8th grade and you're with a whole bunch of 7th graders, you're a little sad. I was a little depressed. I was like, why did you put me in with these children? And then the other thing in Utah, where I grew up, uh, Salt Lake City area, a lot of the kids naturally were taking gymnastics and piano lessons when they're usually 4 or 5. Like that's, you're
Wow.
keeping up with the Joneses and
Right.
like the Mormon religion's very strong and prominent. And like, you want to be able to show everybody else at your church that your kid is like excelling. And one of the best ways to show that is that they're really good at the piano and really good at gymnastics. So that was normal for them. And so here I was. If you learn piano, by the way, you're really good at beginning percussion. Randomly enough, not to derail the conversation, but it's less about drums and more about the bells, which is like a xylophone set up
Right.
the same way as a piano. So the B flats, the C's, all of these notes look exactly like and are positioned as what you are already able to do with both of your hands. Now you're just doing with these little mallets.
Right.
And so I was behind anyway because they had been playing piano
Oh
for
no.
like 4, 5, 6, 8 years before we even got there.
Right.
And one day I decided to switch to the tuba. And so I would come in early, and I was becoming more of like a diligent person because I didn't want to be with all those seventh graders that were better than me. It was really offensive. So that was like a turning point when I started playing the tuba. He said I had to reach a certain level if I wanted to exceed and go to something else. And so I started to apply myself for the first time in my life, so much so that I learned a couple of other instruments. Like my friend taught me how to play the clarinet. Another friend taught me to play the trumpet. And I told my band director, and when I was in 8th grade, I told him, "Hey, I'm going to write a symphony like for our band so we can play it at the end of the year." And he laughed at me.
Wow.
And I felt like I had to prove something to him. So I applied myself even more, so much so that I learned he laughed and he was like, "You would have to learn every instrument in the whole orchestra if you wanted to write something like that. You'd have to understand the register keys, the octave keys, the breaks, what notes are too high, which notes are too low, what is the range that this instrument could play, and what are the challenges because of the fingerings to be able to do it," for example. And so I said, "Okay, well, then I'll just learn it." So I started just like applying myself super, super hard. So I ended up writing a symphony, and we did play it at the end of that year. And so it was a remarkable amount of time. And the same year I did some extracurricular and did track and field and wrestling. And I had a 0.38 grade point average for the first couple of semesters. And they were like, "You cannot do track and field or wrestling if these are your grades. You're going to have to get it above a 2.0. And I'm like, "Okay, I've got to apply myself there." So like it was a turning point of never having accountability, never really caring about those things. And now all of a sudden feeling like I was a fast runner and I couldn't even do that without my grades. And I pushed myself enough to hit a threshold. And so that year, I went from fighting every year before that to never getting in another fist fight in my entire life. Like not a single time since I was in 8th grade. And so that was a huge turning point for me, honestly. And I think there was also parts where maybe the music and the classical music that I started to enjoy also has had some notable benefits where it helps human beings' brains kind of connect left to right, synapses or whatever they're calling it. It helps you develop your mind better because you're listening to that type of music. So I think it was a mixture of applying myself, having a reason to be around instead of just being a problem child, and wanting to prove myself, which I had to push myself just to be able to do it. So that was the year that everything really changed for me, for sure.
And what about your parents? Did they notice it? Did they comment on the change that was happening to you?
Yeah, they did. Many, many times. My mom not really proud of herself, and I'm not saying she was abusive or anything. Like that's not at all what I'm trying to say. But she would pull. I had a mullet back then, so I had like a longer tail behind, and like she would like either pinch me to get my attention or pull my hair, to get my attention. She always said she was never proud of it, but like I was horrible, and I don't know what I would do if I had the same situation. But at any point, she commented like, we didn't know if we were supposed to send you to reform school, send you back to where you came. Like we didn't know what to do with you. But you always had a solid heart, and I always knew that you were good, but like you didn't handle pressure. I still think I need to be better at handling pressure, but it's changed remarkably ever since then. But yeah, to answer your question, yes, she's mentioned tons of times, Like the other, we're during holidays right now. And so we were having like a Thanksgiving dinner,
Yeah.
just like last month or whatever it was. And she was like, I'm so proud of you, like the man that you've become. And she said it in a way that got me pretty emotional. We started kind of crying together. And
Yeah.
it reminded me that like I really started off in a way that would have been very scary for some parents.
Yeah, and isn't it interesting though? I think there's a movie called Sliding Doors, and that and you talk about how there can be a moment in your life and how transformational that can be. And if that moment hadn't happened, where could you be right now? If you hadn't changed tracks, you could be in a very different circumstance to what you are now. It's
Hmm.
quite incredible, really, when you start thinking about it. But yeah, a remarkable transition. So what about your stepdad and his influence on you and your entrepreneurial journey? So he started sort of talking to you about your money and allocating your money.
Yeah, you did.
As you were growing up, what were the other things he got you to do? Did he get you doing lots of jobs and things? Like, was he the one that really sort of fired your entrepreneurial spirit?
He was actually in 1996, I believe it was, is when a book, a game called Cash Flow came out. I believe it was 1996. I was just in grade school, I think at the time, maybe middle school, and yeah, middle school. And he is a avid reader. My stepdad reads tons of books. So that came out. It became a number one bestseller. He read it, and it was impactful for him, even though he was already a real estate investor, even though he already owned a couple of businesses. Like he liked the way and the simplicity of the message with Rich Dad Poor Dad, for example. And so he tried to get me to read it after Cash Flow came out, the book came out. And he always used to say, like, save 10%, invest 10%, pay yourself first 10%, and to tithe, basically to give away 10%. And so he would say that stuff, and at the same time he was putting me on his payroll at like the tree farm. He owned a few companies, but the tree farm, I would water plants every summer, for example, for $1 an hour. And when we fast forward it, I did some of those things for a long period of time. I even had envelopes where I would get paid. When I would get paid, I would put like 10%, 10%, 10%, 10%, so that I could do the things that he taught me. And I hit some pretty bad like financial times after buying my first apartment building. I bought my first apartment in 2008, and in 2009, the economy in my city just went horribly. And my company, I had like 13 employees, which was a lot back then for me. And I was so proud of myself. I was making like 20,000 a month and I was just in college. Like I was
All right.
basically making higher than our top 1%. But I was just in university. So
What were you doing? What were you doing to make that income?
I had a handyman company. So we would do things like we would do drywall, we would do paint, we would do plumbing, we would do electrical. And so I had several full-time employees that had kind of their specialty. One of them would be a tile guy, one would be a carpet person, one of them would be a painter, and one was an electrician. And so I was collecting usually about 65 an hour for our services. And we were the biggest company at the time in our county. So we were like the well-known company in our county. We were always booked out like a couple of months in advance. Well, at least during the summer, like it would be May and we were booked out to July all the time. It would be July and we were booked out through October. So that's what we were doing. My main role was just doing the bids. And so I would go, I would draw it up, I would measure it, And then I would put together the bids usually with my team's help, because they knew more about their craft than I did about their individual craft. So I'd just be like, how much do we charge for this? How much is the mortar? How much is the tile? That kind of stuff. How much is the backer board? Whatever it was. And then we would charge 65 an hour, or we would charge per job. And I was able to pay my guys at the time, because this was like a while back, just a little over minimum wage, like where minimum wage was like around $7.50. I was paying 10, 12, or $15 an hour to most of my guys. 15 was absolutely at the top end. So like I was making, $50 an hour per person, and I had 13 employees. So it was doing really, really well. For me, as in college still, and like most of my employees were a little bit older than me, but that absolutely had an end in the 2009-ish time, after Utah's really seeing the economy crashing, where I think for some of the United States, at least, they were seeing it a little earlier. Utah took a little bit of time, but it became where like the contractors were becoming handymen. The contractors' employees were all becoming handymen. So I went from almost having no good competition to having a serious amount of competition in that field. And like we were charging 65, and some people were charging 35. And now out of nowhere, people are charging $5 an hour, $10 an hour, $12 an hour, $15 an hour, $25 an hour, 35, 65, 100, 150 an hour. And we kind of went into a place where we were lost in the sea, and the price didn't make that sense. If somebody wanted somebody really good, they were going to pay somebody that was 150. If somebody wanted to save some money, and a lot of people did, because they weren't making as much money. A lot of people were losing their houses in the county that I was in, and a lot of people weren't even doing the work anymore. They were pushing it off because they didn't have the money, or they didn't feel confident in the market, and so they wanted to wait. So we went from the best of times to just a really hard time. And during that, my tenants at my apartment, my multifamily, I had a couple of them that couldn't pay anymore. One of them, Jose, literally was one of my employees, and he and his family of 6, like 4 kids, his family I had to give Jose all of my jobs, and I got a bartending gig, for example. So because I needed him to be able to pay, or else I was going to kick him out of the apartment on the streets, for example. So I remember just having a lot of challenges, and I ended up giving it's called a deed in lieu of foreclosure, deed in lieu in the US. I don't know if they have that everywhere, but I ended up basically signing the property back over to the lender in 2011, because it was like rock bottom for me, and I was basically having to pay all of this for years, and trying to suck it up, and I didn't want anyone to know, so I didn't like do anything about it, or seek out help until the day that I was like, my credit cards are maxed out, my bank account is down to $3,000. If I pay this, I won't be able to eat. And so I gave it back to the lender in 2011, 2 years of struggle. And then it was funny, random story, in 2012, things in Utah started growing again. So anyway, that's like a little story, which I didn't even intend on bringing up, but I think it was just answering some of your questions.
Yeah. So looking back on that, though, looking back now, how do you see it? Do you think that you learned a bit from that? How do you reflect on that experience now?
It's made me feel more cautious about market cycles.
Yeah.
Which is a reason why you probably noticed earlier how I mentioned I used to have a lot of apartment buildings. We used to be above 100 million, like in ownership of real estate investments. And today I'm selling my last, let me think. I only have two properties left, a 200 unit, two multifamilies left, a 200 unit and nope, excuse me, an 83 unit and a 68 unit. That's all I've got left right now.
Right.
And then 3 houses. My goal is to go ahead and exit all of the properties while I can, and then to go back into acquisitions when I understand what's going on with the market. Because even though we're like, I think like 2 years into COVID right now, actually technically past 2 years into like COVID-19, it's still where we recently had the Delta variant, and then some other variant that starts with an O. The things are getting shut down again worldwide. I don't know what's going to happen with real estate, and I don't want to be left holding. I don't want to be playing musical chairs and not have a seat, for example. So we stopped acquisitions, and it's a lot to do with that. I think I care more about trying to have money in the bank than I used to. I used to be happy with a net worth number. So like, oh, my net worth went up by 200,000 this year. That would make me happy. But now, like, I realize that I can't pay a damn thing with a net worth. It's only some vanity metric, right? What is most important is like money in the bank. So I am a lot more cautious about like not using credit cards, because I don't want to be, not able to sit down when the music stops. So I'm like really focused on, and it's not even that I'm perfect at it, but I'm focused on it. I care about it a lot more than I did before this example. And
so do you think then that experience that you just described, that's really stayed with you and you learned that lesson? So this time around, you're like, I'm not going to stay in the market when I don't understand what's going on. I could get caught out. I'm going to divest myself now while I can and sit it out. And then once things come back to what makes sense to me, then I'll consider going back in.
Yeah, exactly. 100%. And I mean, we were serving podcasters, for example, like in my other company, Grow Your Show, we were serving them prior to COVID era, like back in like basically July of 19 is when we started doing that. And it was like March or April of 20 where I said, like I'm going to put more into serving podcasters now and not worry so much about the real estate. I remember pivoting quickly. Like we had already done it for maybe 6 months, but I thought at the time, I don't know what's going to happen. So we really got to grow this part. So we can be maybe diversified is the name, or maybe multiple streams of income is the better term for it. But I definitely started getting anxiety about PTSD about having to sign over my first apartment over to the lender a dozen years before.
So you lost the other property back in 2011. Obviously, a lot happened between then and now. Can you just give us a little bit of a picture on that? Like, I mean, clearly you lost that property, but you got back into the market and you've ended up growing a substantial portfolio. How did you do that insofar as, like, did you have a job going on, and to what extent were you leveraging off just fast capital appreciation? Can you just give us a little bit of insight into that?
100%. So in 2011, when I lost that apartment, I had started bartending while basically paying Jose to be my only employee so that he could still pay for his stuff, right? And then, so I got into bartending, which was serving and bartending is what put me through college before I started my first business, and then lost it in 2009-ish. I focused on that, and it was around that time that I met my kid's mother, and her son, and we had a kid together. And I was not making a whole bunch of money, and I had just lost like my pride and some money and my apartment, of course.
Yeah.
Whereas my main focus was to bartend and raise this family, so I wasn't involved in real estate until 2015. And what ended up happening is my stepdad came out from Utah to Denver, where I was living, and we went to a real estate conference. And he's like, "Adam, you got to get back into it." And I'm like, "Well, my tail's between my legs, and I'm afraid, and I lost all this money, and how am I supposed to start without money?" And he's like, "Just come to this thing. If I buy this ticket, it's a $3,500 ticket for like 3 or 4 days, and I drive out to you and stay in a hotel. Will you at least come to this real estate conference with me?" And I said, "Yeah, I'll do that with an open mind." And in 2015, when I went there, because of my experience level, I had done a couple of deals by myself, and my stepdad and I had done a couple of deals for him. And I had, bought and lost one, and I knew a few things about the investment side versus just owning your own house. And the reason I state that is important because while we were at the seminar, they'll ask questions sometimes, and you'll raise your hand to kind of answer it. And I'm not really a know-it-all necessarily, but I happen to know a lot of the answers to the questions. Right. And I had paid attention. I had been involved in real estate in the past before I lost my last property in 2011. But I would raise my hand, I would answer the question, and I found that there was a few higher net worth individuals that also came to that event. I couldn't have paid for it myself. I didn't have $3,500.
No.
But there was a few people that had maybe 35 grand, 60 grand, 100 grand, maybe even $1 million or 2 million, but not much more than that were moving closer and closer to me. And they were all of the mindset that they had done everything that they needed to do to get this money. Now they wanted to preserve the wealth, and they wanted to do it without having to work very hard. So they were all looking for a workhorse who had a lot of time, but not as much money, where they had a lot of money, but not as much time that they wanted to spend towards something like this. They were retired. And so I had a few of them just ask me, "Can I partner with you? Can I give you all of my money and you just buy the deals?"
Wow.
So that was where it really started. And I never really realized that I had value like that. I thought that you would be lucky to have someone put their money in with you.
Yeah.
And then I started to realize that I had some value that benefited people that were busy and wealthy.
Yeah.
And that it was almost better for them and smarter for them to utilize other people's time than it was for me to utilize other people's money. OPM, OPT is what I call it. And so here I was realizing that I had something of value, and I started partnering with them. And we would sometimes, and don't say that this is going to happen all the time, but we would in 8 days double our money. We would buy something for $15,900 and sell it for $32,000, and basically even after expenses, double the amount of money that we had. And so we had a fun time. We were doing like tax deeds. We were going to I was doing all the work. I was doing all the research, and we would just buy it, and their accounts were attached to their bank accounts were attached to my bidding account, and we would just buy them and flip them as fast as we could. And that became where I was working like 60 hours a week, more than my job. And we were splitting the profits. I think for the most part, it was like 75 in their favor, 25 for me. And I was doing okay. Like I was doing fine, but I didn't want to be working for money. So I even changed that model to buying rentals. And so we would buy small portfolios of rentals. For example, we'd spend maybe like $45,000 to buy $100,000 of three small properties in a small town.
Yeah.
And then we would get a loan on it for the amount that we put into it. And then we would just keep buying. And so like, that was one of the years that my net worth went up by something like 200 to 250,000 one year, just because we bought so many properties that my small 25% percentage was over 200 grand that I did with just a couple of partners. So that's where it was going. And then that turned into something called syndication, which is we're pooling, instead of one or two investors, we're basically working with like 30 or more investors and buying a larger apartment. We manage it. And so we started doing that in 2017, 18, and our last acquisition was 2019. We stopped acquisitions in 2020 and 21.
And so how did you get into podcasting? So you're doing the property.
Yeah.
What happened that turned you into going into podcasting? How did that come
2016, I started a meetup group. 2017, I started the podcast. The whole intention behind it was to support more people in the real estate space, connect with more people in the real estate space, add value, make connections. I heard your network is your net worth. I believed it. So I felt like I didn't have a huge network, and which meant that I had some limits on my net worth ability. So in 2016, I started a meetup. In 2017, I started a podcast. Remarkably, and if I may brag on your podcast, if you don't mind,
Absolutely.
The meetup group became one of the top 6 meetups in the world. In 2018, I got to go and speak at meetup headquarters in Manhattan in New York City. And so I ended up going on their dime. They paid for my food. They paid for my part of my flight, all of my hotel, because they wanted me to speak at this gathering of just the top 150 meetup organizers in the world. Whereas I guess there was 225,000 meetups and in the world, and they just took like the top 150 of us, and they had 6 of us speak, and I was one of the speakers. And at any rate, there is some tangibles for this, because I don't think it's simply because I'm a good guy or whatever. I think I did some things differently with that meetup, and I also did some things differently with my podcast that I started just a few months later in 2016 or 17.
I've got to ask, I can't wait any longer. I've got to ask, what do you think was the difference? Why did your meetup perform so much better than most others?
Part of it is that the things that I cared about happened to be the things that the meetup algorithms cared about. Later, when I was at meetup headquarters, their 6th floor, it's a multi-floor like company. But on the 6th floor is just the engineers. So it's this giant like open space with just a bunch of engineers. And I went up there to meet with them, and I asked them, why am I speaking here? Why me? And they said, here's a few of the reasons. They give me a few reasons why. Number one is I had a higher percentage of ratings and reviews. So I had the number one amount of ratings and reviews than any meetup in the world at that time. So that portion of it was just number one. And why did I get so many ratings and reviews? 2 reasons. Number one, I actually asked for them, and I used some sales techniques to make it more probable that people would do it. Number 2, I hosted more meetups than other people. And number 3, I had more people at my events than most people. So I was getting just a huge amount of people taking action. We would see over 4,000 faces per year because we were doing a weekly meetup instead of a monthly meetup. I was really good at getting people into the room in the first place. Yeah. And then at the end, the sales technique that I mentioned to you to get those ratings and reviews is that if you should know that people won't do something if they don't understand the thing. They literally can't do it. They won't even try if it is confusing. A confused mind says no. You've always heard that. So for me, what I would do is I would paint a picture for people that to get the ratings review. So I say, hey, just to let you know, today you're going to get an email. It's going to come out to you, and all it's going to say is, what did you think of the meetup? It means a lot to me if you're honest when you get that. So anything that you want more of, anything that you liked, just didn't like, please put it in there when you get it. And it only takes about a minute. So I made it sound simple. I also helped somebody create it spiritually before it was manifest fruition. Like in the mind, they've already seen themselves doing it. And so when it comes, they're more likely to do it. I would use language that was very, it's basically called assume the sale. Like basically when I would say, when you get that, you're going to do this, instead of, if you get that, would you mind doing the thing? Which is fine, but the language of, hey, when you get that, you're just going to do this, and then you're going to do this, and it's that simple, is a language that helps somebody be like, okay, I'm going to do this, then this, and then this. And I would say it at every single meetup. Another thing that is notable is the marketing. Like a lot of meetup organizers, they only market to on meetup. Like basically they'll just have the meetup event posted, and that's the only step that they do. Then the next step of people, the next level of marketers for meetup would also send emails through the group itself through meetup.com. And then the third level is that they would also send out emails from their own to their own email list. Right. The fourth level is that they would post it on social. The things that I was doing on top of all those things, I was doing all of them, but the things that I would do on top is I would do individual phone calls, individual text messages, individual private messages, where I would basically say something like, and this was like a real estate group, and anyone who understands the real estate investing industry, there you have to have lenders, or else you're not going to do any deals. You have to have lenders, you have to have realtors, you have to have insurance providers. You've got all of these different, you got to have real estate brokers, you have to have the investors, you have these wholesalers. It's a whole ecosystem that kind of works together. And what I would do when I was trying to get the most amount of people to each and every event, which we would have every single week, is I would call up my friends and family. Well, maybe not family. I'd call up my friends. My family lived in another state, and I would call up people that I knew in the industry, and I would just let them know who was going to be there and that they needed to meet each other. So I took that extra step and just like, hey, Andrew, I know that you're looking to lend more money this year. I have this event that's coming up on Thursday that who I'm inviting is this person, this person, this person. There's a couple of them I think you need to meet if you really want to have good people to lend money to, people that care about what they're doing. So I recommend that you come to this event for this reason. Other people, if they were even marketing it, or even if they were calling somebody, they would say something like, hey, we meet every single month. You should come to one of our events. But when I was doing it, it was like, make sure you get your babysitter in line. Make sure you don't miss this event because this event does X, Y, Z for you. So it's a different message. It's a message of, you got to come here now for this reason, versus what they would say is like, we just meet every month. Well, everybody is freaking busy. Everyone's busy. So like it comes to the day, there's no urgency. There's no reason that you have to make that one. You're going to say, I've got this deadline at work. My kids, I've got to do this one thing. And so you would always make excuses not to go to an event that has no urgency behind it. So I always made the urgency happen. Anyway, there I could like talk about Meetup forever, but the point is 2016 started the Meetup, ended up getting really, really, really beneficial. It's 2017 started the podcast. Whole reason why I'm trying to grow my network, because I believe network is your net worth. And the podcast ended up growing in nationally recognized, well, worldwide recognized as a top 1% podcast in the whole world. And for some of the same reasons, like what I did, how I would call people, how I would tell them, hey, this episode will solve your problem. And like, it was all about what's in it for me, that what's in it for the listener, what's in it for that person. So I literally would be at somebody else's real estate conference or my own, and I would solve people's problems with my episodes. I would make sure that I can solve a problem that everybody seems to have. Like, how in real estate, how do you find a good market? How do you know what a good market is? How do you know which metrics matter? How do you know at which metric makes the most sense? So I'd put together an episode that would solve that problem, that would deep dive into the markets, give a bunch of tactful and tactical advice and resources like websites that you need to use and how to use them. And then the exact metrics that you should look for. And we would create that. And then I knew that everybody's talking, hey, which markets are you in? Why are you in those markets? And I would just say, hey, I don't know if it's helpful, guys. But I spent some time with a friend of mine creating an episode at number 242. I still remember the number, even though I sold that podcast a couple years ago. But episode 242, it's going to solve this problem, and it's going to give you all of the resources that are going to help you to be able to make that choice. I don't want you to be in a market that has a headwind. I want you to be in a market that has a tailwind that's going to help you go further than the effort that you're putting in. And if you want, I can queue up your phone right now with that episode. That will solve your problem. And I would just have episodes like that would solve somebody's problem in my industry. And it was a little bit of doing the podcast live on Facebook, for example. Like I would go on Facebook and I would push the live and let my Zoom go into Facebook. So I'm getting extra eyeballs on it. And I would answer those questions, and I would memorize the episodes that solve certain problems. And instead of telling people, you should listen to my podcast, I'm a good person, you would say, oh, this is the problem that you're going through, like a doctor. Think about a doctor real quick, because this is beneficial for anyone looking for success. Doctors, you don't show up to the doctor and before they ask you a single question, they tell you the prescription. They don't write a prescription without knowing what's wrong with you. You might get x-rays. They might touch different parts. Does it hurt here? Does it hurt here? Does it hurt when I do this? Where does it hurt? How does it hurt? What does it feel like? They get to know the details of the thing before they give the prescription. That's what I think helped me to be better at running a meetup group, running my own business, and running a podcast that became really well known in my industry. Is I'm asking people, what are you struggling with? How does that feel? What have you tried already? And then saying, well, hey, I'm thinking that a prescription, something that might support you. I did this episode with Paul. He was on my podcast and he taught X, Y, and Z. Yeah. I think that might solve your problem. Would you like me to queue you up? Would you like the thing that's going to help you? And they're always going to say yes. And then I'm going to get them to subscribe, download. They're going to hear the authenticity. It was about them, not me and my needs. I don't need people to listen to my podcast, but I need that person to have their problem solved. So that's kind of like what I believe helped me the most with my meetup group and like growing a podcast, and how we've actually helped a lot of other podcasters also get ranked in the same numbers, top 1%. And it stems from rethinking the marketing style, you know?
And it seems to me, though, the core to what you were doing, which is it's consistent with, you know, other industries where people are very successful, and that is to really understand your market, to really understand your target market and therefore to be able to cater to the target market because you know it so well. And that's where a lot of businesses don't seem to go to that point. So they, you wonder sometimes why some businesses succeed more than others. And often one of the reasons can be is because they've taken the time to understand their target market better than anybody else, and to therefore really make sure that they are connecting with that market. That's very much sounds to me what's been the situation for you. You've really gone the extra mile to really understand your market and to deliver what it wants.
I think you're truly on point with that, and I hope that your listener really is able to do the same thing, because I think they'll get a lot of value by taking that extra time to know what their people want and how to deliver it. And just like one resource could be it is answerthepublic.com. It's just a cool website, answerthepublic.com. Whereas you can actually, if you don't want to do all of the hard work on your own, you can just go to the website and you type in, for example, we've talked a little bit about real estate today or podcasting today, but you'll look at whoever is your perfect avatar. You'll type in the genre, and you can actually find a ton of questions that people are already searching, like Googling it, searching on all the search engines for these certain questions, where you can literally create the content that's already being looked for and missing. And now you'll have an even better chance of doing that thing, and with a little less of your own efforts. So answerthepublic.com might be a really good place if somebody listening is looking to figure that out.
So with your meetup, at that point, were you making any money out of that, or was it purely all about networking at that stage?
No, yes and no. We've got to think of making money there's roundabout ways that you are making money.
Right.
I did not have sponsors for the meetup, and I didn't charge for the meetup. So I was spending my time and whatever it cost me to print some of those things out, and the amount of money that it would cost me to have a projector, like a decent $700, $800 projector. They're probably more now, $1,200 or something, but I would have to pay that. So technically I was I was investing in what this meetup could do for our company. But when you think of the true value, even though I didn't make money because of just through the meetup, we were doing syndication, which means we're raising other people's money to buy apartments. And there's a lot of ways that we make money in our company. For example, you make money through the residual cash flow that the ownership of this apartment building will bring. And I will have some of that, and my past investors will have some of that. Additionally, we charge what's called an acquisition fee. So, for example, not to get in the weeds of this one individual company, but we would charge 3% to 5%, but usually 3% of whatever the whole amount of the purchase price was. So we're buying a $10 million property. We're going to say that day one, my company is going to pull in 300 grand because we found the deal, we put it all together, we paid for our attorneys, and we're going to pay all those expenses and net 300,000 the day that we close it. So that's how our company would make it. Buying $100 million of real estate, that's a lot of 3%. And so we made fair money through the acquisition fee and some percentage with residual fees. So actually I felt like I was retired in 2019 and 18 because we were making so much money. I didn't have to work. And I remember when I started supporting podcasters, I remember thinking, man, I don't need this money. Why am I even doing this? And I remember thinking it's because I have something to offer that not everybody can offer. So I'll just help them and I may as well get paid for it instead of doing it for free like I was doing for a couple of years before. Anyway, it wouldn't matter what your company is. If you're a lender, if you are a coach or a consultant, whatever company, whatever business you're in, if you're truly serving those human beings at a high level with your whole heart and your, like, everything you got, it will come back to you. You'll have more coaching clients. You'll have more people taking action on your services. And when they are deciding which lender should I choose, I could go and look for all the lenders. They're like, what? No, Paul's got a lending company. Let me just see what he can offer. And so you become the first choice for that passive investor to put their money with you. You become the first choice for that customer to hire you instead of your direct competition, because you've added so much value. I remember when I started a mastermind in 2019. No, that was 2018. Sorry. I remember when I started a mastermind after just giving like lots of free value to people. I sold out in literally 1 hour. It's this weirdest like thing that happened. But I remember saying that I was going to have 25 spots, and I sold 32 in 1 hour because there was only like 40 people at the event.
Yeah.
And I never expected to oversell it. And so basically I had more people join than I wanted to join because they came in so fast that I was not able to count and put a stop on it.
Yeah.
And so like I just said, hey, if you want to be part of it, it's this much money, and you gotta commit to the fee at this event right now. And not in a salesy way, but like in a way, like, I don't know where we are, so it's usually going to be this cost. And for a few of you, if you want to join, it'll be this cost. And I made a significant of revenue that day and more than I ever expected, more than I wanted, more than I expected. And it was just crazy. And it's because I was just adding value for so long that people were like, oh, he's finally offering something, I'll take it. And the other thing that we would offer is limited partner. It's basically a passive investor, like people that invest in Coca-Cola, but they would invest in our apartments. Well, we had done 4.2 million just from that room. So we raised 4.2 million, which means that we basically were able to close on 20-ish million just from that room, which that's like 3%, 20 million is not bad. It's still 600 grand. And even if I have a small percentage of the whole pot, because we got partners and things like that, it's still very good revenue to bring into a company. And you can do it too, regardless of like whatever your company is. That's just what we did. So yes, we made money kind of through hosting that event and adding value. It came back to us. Same thing with hosting a podcast right now. I host a podcast called The Podcast on Podcasting. I sold the real estate one a couple years ago, but now I've got one about podcasting. And I make money because sometimes like I'll interview somebody and they'll just get to know me better and then they'll hire me. Or because I'll interview somebody, they'll have me on their podcast. Just like today, you came on my show and now I'm on your show. Yeah. And you have a few listeners that never heard of me. I cry even thinking about that, but there's some people that never heard of me. And in a way, I'm kind of hacking into the people you're following. Yeah. And now one or two of them are going to say, awesome, I'm interested in that thing. I'll listen to that podcast, or I'll hire that company, or I'll look into the company. It just adds more exposure because I've got my thought leadership platform. And now I'm being able to be on other people's platforms also and kind of grow my business fairly organically that way. So there's so many benefits to like podcasting or running a meetup that it's hard for us to put a dollar amount on it, but there's enough benefit that it makes sense for us to do those things. Now with COVID, meeting in person is a challenge, and I don't know how long COVID's going to last because it's already been over 2 years. But with a podcast, you don't have to deal with that. So it's a avenue that I still like, regardless of the ups or downs in the market or in the whatever's going on with pandemics at the time.
So for you, what's the vision for the future? What are you hoping to achieve in the next few years?
Good question. There's a couple things that I would like to grow. Right now, we have about 32 employees at our podcasting company, and I feel like we only have about 55, maybe up to 60 clients today, but it's just over 55. So it's like we are employing almost a 1-to-2 ratio. Like we can't, we so far, if we had 100 employees, we wouldn't even be able to serve 200. So one thing that I'd like to do is I'd like to make it even more efficient so that we have the ability to serve more than 2 clients per 1 employee. That would be really wonderful. And secondly, I think that us being able to serve more people in general is going to be a benefit. So more people per employee would be one thing that I want to grow. And then in a few years' time, having around 1,000 instead of like 55, 60 clients seems feasible and doable with maybe a staff of 300 to 400.
Yeah.
I'd really like that, especially if it was automated and I didn't have to wear too many hats.
Yeah.
I'm grateful that a lot of the pieces of our company are handled by the managers in the different places. We have 6 managers right now. So one of them manages this type of marketing for people's podcasts to grow. One of them manages all the video production. One manages like the audio production. What we don't have today is somebody in charge of managing like a sales team. Right now, I'm the seller, and I'm also 60% of the sales team. I do almost all of the calls, and somebody else helps me when I can't. Offloading that is a good next step that would help us get into that direction. I've got it to where like I would feel comfortable maybe going on vacation for 3 or 4 weeks, and I only check in for maybe 15 minutes a day. And that's a huge benefit. That's a type of like entrepreneurship that I've really dreamed of, but it would be great to see that in the next few years to where I only have to do that maybe once a week instead of almost once a day, where I only have to check in for 15 minutes to an hour on, let's say, Mondays or Fridays, and everything else could really work like clockwork. So that's some stuff where I'd really like to be. And then just like one last thing that I'll say is in that amount of time, I believe that the real estate market probably will have dropped and be coming back up. So I most likely will focus more of my investment capital instead of like cryptocurrency and my company, growing my company and my team. I probably will be putting a lot of that capital back into real estate investing again. So that's kind of what I see for me in the next few years. If that's just, I don't know. I don't want to get too detailed, but that's really the stuff that I'm looking at.
So just to wrap this up, 2 final questions. Second last question, in maybe 1 or 2, a limited number of words, what is it that motivates you? What are the key motivations for you and what you do?
The main motivation that I have is, well, my kids are a big motivation. Like having them, leaving a legacy for them, supporting them, making them proud, doing a good job. That's a motivation in and of itself. Um, I don't know what if I would do the same thing without them though. So I would say like the biggest motivation is I enjoy doing something that not everybody can do. It leaves my heart happy, gives me a spark, gives me encouragement, makes me feel like I'm doing something for other people, like I'm needed, like I'm necessary, like I'm wanted, like our service matters. And so that is probably the biggest motivation because I could do anything. I could do anything for an income,
Yeah.
but serving podcasters, I found that we do it better in a way that not that it's a challenge. It would be an absolute challenge for a podcaster to find somebody who does all of the things that we do. And it makes me just so it feels rewarding. So A, my kids, yes, but B, the just the feeling of offering something of true value, it gives me a lot. It like is
Yeah.
the fuel for my life, I think, you know.
Okay. And last question, looking back on your own experience, what do you think have been the keys to your success? And what do you think, taking that into account, are some key pieces of advice to help our listeners go on their journey to success?
Well, there is one thing that is going to help every single person. It's only one thing that has a blanket thing. And I learned it when I was in junior high from that same director that laughed at me and said that we're not going to be able to, I can't write a symphony this year because I'd have to learn every instrument. He made us listen, memorize quotes. One of them was from Calvin Coolidge, and it's the thing that I think is going to benefit your listener the absolute most.
Right.
It talks about the main reason for success is determination. It's not if you're a genius. It's not how educated you are. It's not how smart you are. It's not how much money you've had. Calvin Coolidge noticed, and I remember almost arguing it, that the difference between the successful is that they have persistence and determination, basically saying that they never quit.
Yeah.
And I say that because there's a lot of people that are way smarter than me. I have to admit, I am not the smartest guy. Absolutely not. There's a lot of people that are more educated than me. I quit college after getting an associate's degree. There's a lot of people that have more talents than me, but they fail and they never get back on the horse. If they're looking to elevate their business,
Yeah.
they run into some struggle. It's harder than they expected. And
Yep.
so what most people do is they have this threshold of how much of that failure they're willing to encounter before they quit.
Right.
And whatever that threshold is, it's the same threshold. It's similar to the 3 feet of gold story that we have heard. That guy, that miner, quit. He knew that there was gold. He tried and tried and tried, and then he finally quit. Sold it for pennies on the dollar to somebody else, and that person dug for 3 feet, got the gold, and had all that guy ever wanted. The difference is if that which we persist in doing, if we have persistence and determination, like Calvin Coolidge says, we are omnipotent. That's full, endless potential. In the real estate space, I've seen so many people that tried one thing, kind of ran into some issues, and they just decided that real estate doesn't work. And now they're telling other people that real estate doesn't work. In the podcasting space, I see people start a podcast. They don't get as many listeners as they want, and they tell everybody how hard it is and not to even do it. They become the opposite of what they believed. And it has to be stated, especially at the end of the podcast, that anything you want to do, if you want to succeed, the biggest determining factor is not how smart you are, not how cool you are, not how rich you are today. But if you're willing to get up, like Michael Jordan got up and failed and failed and failed more than any other basketball player, is the only reason why he succeeded. I failed a shiz ton of amount of times. And I really, truly believe that being able to proceed through the failure, through the downsets, is why I have achieved whatever I've achieved today.
Fantastic. Well, that's a fantastic way to leave it off. I couldn't have put it better myself. I think that's such an important message. But thank you so much, Adam, for your time. I know your time's precious. I know you're a busy man, but what you've shared with us today is valuable. So I appreciate you taking the time to come on Insights into Success. So thank you very much.
Thank you too.